Bill Cohen spent more than 40 years covering important issues on government and public policy. But when he wasn't using his voice to report current events, he was using it through music and song to encourage listeners to remember headlines from the past. His love of folk music and social justice led him to create a one-man music show, Spirit of the 60s Coffee House, to share music and memories from the era that helped define him.
What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned our government must be strong. It's always right and never wrong. Our leaders are the best of men, and we elect them again and again.
I grew up in Bexley, and that's where I went to school, elementary school and high school, and until I went away to college. I went to college in 1966 until 1970. I spent virtually my whole time, my whole 4 years at Northwestern, doing two things: studying to try to get good grades and protesting the war in Vietnam.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
When I got to Northwestern, just north of Chicago, in the late 60s, the place was exploding. I mean, there were black activists, civil rights activists, anti-war protests, women's liberation activists, gay rights activists. It was just, it was exciting. I mean, everything was happening there.
In restless dreams I walked alone.
A few months after I graduated, I got a 4-hour-a-day job at WOSU Radio. A few years later, after 5 years of doing local reporting, I went down to the State House, started covering the State House, and I was part of the bureau that fed the stories about state government and politics to all the Ohio public radio stations, and so that whole thing lasted, 40-some years.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam.
Although I had really strong views when I was young about the way the world should operate, the way what government policy should be, very quickly I decided the reporter's job is not to espouse, it's to report and let the public decide, let the public radio listeners and the public TV viewers, let them decide who's right. Give them all the facts. That's the role of the reporter in a democracy. I retired in the spring of 2013. Covering all these issues and politicians has been, at various times, frustrating, intriguing, energizing, and even fun. It's been a joy doing this for a living for so long. Thanks for listening and for supporting public radio. Bill Cohen at the Ohio Public Radio State House News Bureau. And now I have a lot more time to do all the things that I was already doing before, but now I have a lot more time to do them, and singing and performing is one of those top things. The 1960s coffee house thing, I've been doing that about 28, 29 years. I call the show the spirit of the 1960s, because what I'm trying to evoke there is that, yes, it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but that wasn't what I think is the important part of the 60s. My theme is that the 60s were important because people stood up. They stood up, they risked their jobs, they risked their freedom. Some people risked their lives, and some were killed, protesting for civil rights, protesting for human rights, protesting for women's liberation, and especially opposing the war in Vietnam. So I kind of wrote a script that kind of, takes people through the era.
An unknown author named Betty Friedan writes a book called The Feminine Mystique.
And then I also do trivia questions. People love trivia questions.
This white TV comedian ran an imaginary campaign for president in '68. Pat Paulson.
Well, the last 15 or 20 years that I've been doing the show, I've made it into a fundraiser for the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. I think it's a nice fit between the theme of, well, let's make it a better world. People tried to make it a better world in the 60s. Let's enjoy the music and the memories, and let's also get a little money to the food bank.
And thank you, stars, for the roof that's over you.
To find out more about Bill Cohen, head to the Detroit Reform's website.